On December 4, 1975, 20-year-old Teree Becker was last seen hitchhiking from Denver to Brighton, Colorado. She was traveling to visit her boyfriend who was incarcerated at the Adams County Jail. Teree had recently moved to Denver from Wyoming after graduating high school and was working to build her life in Colorado. After visiting the jail that day, she was never seen alive again. 2 days later, on December 6, 1975, a couple riding motorcycles discovered a body in an agricultural field near 100 Avenue and Lowell Boulevard in Westminster, Colorado. The body was that of Teree Becker. She was clothed, but her personal belongings were scattered around the area. An autopsy determined that Teree had been sexually assaulted and died from asphyxiation. Her body and belongings had been dumped in the field after her death. Westminster police launched an investigation into Teree's murder. Detectives interviewed witnesses, collected evidence, and followed every available lead. DNA testing technology was not yet available in 1975, limiting the forensic tools investigators could use. Despite their efforts, no suspect was identified. The case went cold. In 2003, nearly 3 decades after Teree's murder, investigators extracted DNA from an unknown male on evidence collected from the rape kit. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. However, the profile did not match anyone in the database. The case remained unsolved. 16 years after Teree Becker was murdered in Colorado, another young woman was killed in strikingly similar circumstances, but this time the location was Las Vegas, Nevada, over 750 miles away. On May 12, 1991, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officers responded to reports of a suspicious death at an apartment in the 1000 block of West Monroe Avenue near Owens and H Street in Westminster, Colorado. The body was that of Sherrie Bridgewater. She was mother of 2 sons. The scene suggested foul play, and the Homicide Division immediately took over the investigation. An autopsy conducted by the Clark County Coroner's Office determined that Sherrie had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The similarities to Teree Becker's murder 16 years earlier were striking, though at this point no one had connected the 2 cases. Both women had been sexually assaulted, both had been strangled, both investigations had physical evidence, but no identified suspect. The investigation into Sherrie's murder was thorough. Detectives worked the case relentlessly, following leads and interviewing anyone who might have information. Evidence was carefully collected and preserved. However, no arrest was made. The case went cold and was assigned to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Cold Case Team. In 2013, advances in DNA technology allowed cold case detectives to revisit Sherrie Bridgewater's case with fresh tools. They submitted a sexual assault kit obtained during the original investigation for DNA examination. The analysis successfully identified a suspect's DNA profile from evidence left at the scene. For the first time, investigators had a genetic profile of the person believed to have murdered Sherrie Bridgewater. However, they still could not put a name to the DNA profile. The profile was uploaded to CODIS in 2013. When the profile was entered into the database, investigators received a hit that would break both cases wide open. The DNA profile matched another suspect's DNA profile from an unsolved homicide in Westminster, Colorado from December 1975. The 2 agencies were suddenly connected by DNA evidence that proved the same person had committed both murders, committed 16 years apart and over 750 miles from each other. Despite this breakthrough, the technology available in 2013 was still not advanced enough to identify who the suspect was solely on the DNA profile. The profile showed them they were looking for the same person,
but without a match to a known individual in the database, they could not identify him. Both agencies continued working together, waiting for technology to advance further. In 2018, both agencies decided to submit the cases for forensic genetic genealogy. This technique uses DNA from crime scenes and compares it against genealogical databases to identify potential relatives of the suspect. The DNA samples were sent to Parabon Nanolabs and to Solves by DNA in Denver, Colorado. 4 years later, in 2022, detectives finally had a name. Through forensic genetic genealogy, investigators identified the suspect as Thomas Martin Elliott. Further investigation revealed a deeply disturbing pattern in Elliott's life that explained the 16-year gap between murders and raised questions about whether there might be additional victims. Thomas Martin Elliott was arrested in Colorado for burglary shortly after murdering Teree Becker in 1975. He was convicted and sent to prison in Carson City, Nevada, to serve a 6-year sentence. He was released from prison in 1981. Shortly after his release from prison in 1981, Elliott sexually assaulted a 13-year-old in Carson City. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 10 more years in prison. He made parole and was released in 1991. 6 months after Elliott was released from prison in 1991, he murdered Sherrie Bridgewater in Las Vegas. 6 months after murdering Sherrie, in November 1991, Thomas Martin Elliott died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Las Vegas. He was 50 years old. His body was buried at a local cemetery. Even after identifying Elliott as the suspect in 2022, investigators could not be certain without directly comparing his DNA to the crime scene evidence. In October 2023, investigators obtained permission to exhume his remains. DNA samples were collected from tissue and bone samples from Elliott's exhumed body. The results confirmed what investigators had determined. Thomas Martin Elliott had murdered both Teree Becker in 1975 and Sherrie Bridgewater in 1991. On January 31, 2024, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department held a press conference to announce that both cold cases had been solved. Homicide Lieutenant Jason Johansson presented the findings and named Thomas Martin Elliott as the killer of both women. The announcement brought closure to families who had waited decades for answers. Sherrie Bridgewater's father had been deeply invested in seeing her daughter's case solved. Tragically, both of Sherrie's parents had passed away before the case was solved. However, investigators were able to communicate with Sherrie's 2 sons, who were now adults. For them, the resolution provided answers to questions they had carried since childhood. The investigation into Thomas Martin Elliott's background raised concerns about whether he might be responsible for additional unsolved crimes. His pattern of violent sexual assaults and murders, combined with the 16-year gap between known murders, suggested that other cases might be connected to him. Investigators from both Las Vegas and Westminster stated they were reviewing other cold cases to determine if he might be linked to additional crimes. The resolution of the Becker and Bridgewater cases demonstrated how advances in DNA technology and forensic genetic genealogy can provide answers even decades after a crime was committed and even after the perpetrator has died.
In the early 1980s, young women began disappearing from the Seattle and Tacoma areas of Washington state. Many were sex workers or runaways, vulnerable teenagers and young adults living on the margins of society. Their bodies began appearing in and around the Green River, south of Seattle. The cases would terrorize the region for decades and become one of the most extensive serial killer investigations in American history. Among the victims were 2 teenage girls whose identities would remain unknown for over 40 years. They were known only as Bones 17 and Bones 20. Their cases would not be solved until advances in DNA technology and forensic genetic genealogy finally revealed their names: Lori Anne Razpotnik and Tammie Liles. Lori Anne Razpotnik was born on November 13, 1967. Growing up in Lewis County, Washington, Lori was described by her mother as a firecracker and pure joy. She was a straight-A student with interests in horses, sports, cooking, and dogs. However, as she grew older, she began skipping school, shoplifting, and running away from home. In 1982, after an argument with her mother about getting a horse, 15-year-old Lori ran away from home. During Thanksgiving of 1982, Lori called her mother one last time, saying she was living in Seattle and was happy. That was the last contact her family had with her. On May 13, 1985, partial remains were discovered in an undeveloped area near Auburn, Washington. The remains were skeletal and could not be identified through conventional means. Without dental records to compare or any missing persons report that matched, the remains were labeled as Bones 17 and stored by the King County Medical Examiner's Office. Investigators had no idea who this young person was or what had happened to them. Tammie Liles was born on May 9, 1967 in Everett, Washington. Details about her early life are limited, but it is known that she became involved in sex work at a young age. In May 1983, 16-year-old Tammie ran away from home. She was last seen alive in downtown Seattle on June 9, 1983. On April 23, 1985, partial remains were discovered near the Tualatin Golf Course near Tigard, Oregon, found alongside those of another unidentified woman. Just 2 months later, in June 1985, another set of remains was found nearby, quickly identified as Denise Bush and Shirley Sherrill, both known victims of the Green River Killer. The proximity of these discoveries led investigators to suspect that the two unidentified women found near the golf course were also victims of the same killer. However, without identification, they could not be officially added to the victim list. In 1988, Tammie's family contacted police to report their daughter missing. They had not heard from her in years and feared something terrible had happened. Police took a report and obtained Tammie's dental records. The dental records matched one set of the partial remains found near the Tualatin Golf Course in Oregon. Tammie Liles was officially identified as a victim in March 1988. Her brother later recalled that when they buried her, they had to use a baby casket because so little of her body had been recovered. The identification of Tammie through dental records solved only part of the mystery. The other woman found at the same site remained unidentified and would not be identified as Angela Girdner until 2009. More importantly, significant portions of Tammie's remains were still missing. Throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, the Green River killings continued. Women kept disappearing and bodies kept being discovered. The investigation became one of the largest in American history, involving hundreds of detectives and thousands of pieces of evidence. In November 2001, advances in DNA technology finally broke the case. Gary Ridgway was arrested after DNA evidence from a saliva sample collected from him in 1987 matched semen found on several victims. In 2003, Ridgway made a deal with prosecutors. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to plead guilty to 48 counts of aggravated murder and to provide information about unsolved cases. As part of this agreement, Ridgway led investigators to locations where he had left victims' bodies. In 2003, Ridgway led investigators to a site along Kent-Des Moines Road in South King County. There, investigators found more skeletal remains, including 25 to 30 bones. These remains were collected and labeled as Bones 20.
A DNA sample was taken from the remains and uploaded to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, which compares DNA profiles from crime scenes against known offenders and other unsolved cases. However, no match was found. Bones 20 remained unidentified. Ridgway was convicted of murdering Bones 20, even though the victim's identity was unknown. He pled guilty to a 49th murder in 2011. Throughout his confessions, Ridgway claimed to have killed between 65 and 70 women, though he was only convicted of 49 murders. For decades, the identities of Lori Anne Razpotnik and Tammie Liles remained unknown. The technology available at the time could not extract enough information from the degraded DNA samples. In the early 2020s, forensic genetic genealogy emerged as a powerful tool. This technique involves building DNA profiles and comparing them against genealogical databases. By identifying genetic relatives, investigators can build family trees and work backwards to identify victims or suspects. The King County Sheriff's Office contracted with specialized laboratories to apply this technology. They worked with Parabon Nanolabs for Bones 17 and Othram for Bones 20. The DNA samples were in terrible condition, degraded by decades of storage. Scientists worked to extract whatever genetic information remained. In December 2023, the King County Sheriff's Office announced a breakthrough. Bones 17 had been identified as Lori Anne Razpotnik through forensic genetic genealogy. Lori had been 15 years old when she ran away from home in 1982. Ridgway had confessed to murdering her in the spring or summer of 1983. Just 1 month later, in January 2024, Bones 20 was tentatively identified as Tammie Liles through work completed by Othram in August 2023. Investigators contacted Tammie's mother and obtained a DNA sample. The University of North Kentucky confirmed the remains were indeed Tammie's. The identification meant that the remains found in Oregon in 1985 and identified through dental records in 1988, and the remains found in King County in 2003 all belonged to the same person, Tammie Liles. She was 16 years old when she disappeared from downtown Seattle on June 9, 1983. With the identification of Tammie Liles, all known remains connected to Gary Ridgway had been identified. It was the end of a 40-year effort to give names back to his victims. Gary Ridgway remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington, serving 49 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is now 75 years old. Despite his confessions and convictions, investigators believe he may be responsible for additional murders. His plea deal only covered crimes committed in King County, meaning he could still face charges if connected to murders in other jurisdictions. The cases of Lori Anne Razpotnik and Tammie Liles demonstrate both the horror of serial predation and the persistence of investigators who never stopped working to identify victims and bring closure to families. The advancement of forensic genetic genealogy has provided answers that seemed impossible just a decade ago, giving names back to the nameless and bringing decades of uncertainty to an end.